What is an axosomatic synapse? A synapse between the axon of one neuron and the soma of another neuron. What is an axodendritic synapse? A synapse between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another neuron. What is a multipolar neuron? A neuron with one axon and multiple dendrites, most common in the CNS. What is a bipolar neuron? A neuron with one axon and one dendrite, found in special sensory organs, such as retina, olfactory epithelium. What is a unipolar neuron? A neuron with a single process that splits into two branches, mainly found in sensory neurons of the PNS. Main cells of the nervous system: neurons and neuroglia. What is the name of the connection between neurons? Synapse. What is the general function of the nervous system? To receive, process, and respond to internal and external stimuli to maintain homeostasis. Which organelles can't be found inside dendrites? Nucleus and axon hillock. Which parts of the neuron can be found in the white matter? Myelinated axons. Which parts of the neuron can be found in the gray matter? Neuron cell bodies, dendrites, unmyelinated axons, and synapses. What is the structure and function of myelin? Myelin is a lipid-rich sheath that surrounds axons and increases the speed of nerve impulse conduction. What are myelin-producing cells in the CNS and PNS? In the CNS, there are oligodendrocytes, semicolon. In the PNS, there is the Schwann cells. Name and function of different neuroglia in the CNS. Astrocytes. They're responsible for supporting the blood-brain barrier and nutrient regulation. The oligodendrocytes produce myelin. The microglia are responsible for immune defense, such as macrophages, and the epidermal cells are for line ventricles and produce and circulate CSF. CSF is also cerebrospinal fluid. Name and function of different neuroglia in the PNS. Schwann cells are to myelinate axons, and satellite cells are to support neuron cell bodies in the ganglia. Where is the visual reflex center? Superior colliculi of the midbrain. Where is the auditory center located in the brain? Temporal lobe, primary auditory cortex, and inferior colliculi, auditory reflexes. Where is the speech center located in the brain? Broca's area in the left frontal lobe, for most people. Which neuroglial cells counts as a macrophage? Microglia. What is the function of the hypothalamus? It regulates homeostasis, hormone secretion, temperature, hunger, thirst, and circadian rhythms. What is the function and location of Broca's area? Located in the frontal lobe, it controls speech production. Where is the motor center located in the brain? Precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. Where is the primary sensory center located in the brain? Postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe. What are the different parts of the meninges? Dura mater, arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. Name the fissure separated the two brain hemispheres. Longitudinal fissure. Name the fissure separating the cerebrum from the cerebellum. Transverse fissure. What is the biggest part of the diencephalon? Thalamus. Where is the location of the third ventricle? Between the two halves of the hypothalamus. Where is the location of the fourth ventricle? Between the pons and the cerebellum. Where is the central sulcus located in the brain? Between the frontal and parietal lobes. Where is the lateral sulcus located in the brain? Separates the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobes. Different parts of the limbic system: hippocampus, amygdala, hypothalamus, thalamus, cingulate gyrus. What is the function of the hippocampus? Memory formation and spatial navigation. Which part is significantly big in the motor and sensory homunculus? Hands and face. Where are the centers for respiration, heart rate, and cough? Medulla oblongata. Protective functions of CSF BBB, Menges. CSF cushions and nourishes the brain. BBB prevents harmful substances from entering the brain. Menges protect the brain and spinal cord. Which areas of the TNS do not have an intact BBB? Circumventricular organs, hypothalamus, pineal gland. Brain of a female versus female in size. Male brains are typically larger, but remember, size does not correlate to intelligence. Functions of excitatory neurotransmitters. They promote action potentials by depolarizing the membrane. Function of inhibitory neurotransmitters. They prevent action potentials by hyperpolarizing the membrane. How many lobes are in each hemisphere of the brain? There's 5. Frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, and insula. Where's the visual center of the brain located? Occipital. The right hemisphere of the brain is dominant for creativity, spatial ability, and emotion. The left hemisphere for language, logic, and analytical thinking. Aphasia is the loss of ability to understand or express speech due to brain damage. The diencephalon has thalamus, hypothalamus, and the epithalamus, which does include pineal gland. The endoneurium is connective tissue around a bundle of nerve fibers. That bundle can also be called a fascicle. What is the epineurium? The epineurium is the outermost connective tissue around the central nerve. Depolarization of the cell membrane is when sodium enters the cell, making it positive. On the other hand, repolarization is when potassium leaves the cell, restoring negative internal charge. Sodium in depolarization makes the inside of the cell more positive, making an action potential. Potassium efflux restores the resting membrane potential. Efflux to mean outward. Threshold is the membrane potential that must be reached to trigger action potential. Reflex arc is a pathway that controls a reflex involving receptor, neuron, center, motor neuron, and an effector. Where is the location of the spinal cord? In the vertebral canal from the brainstem to L1, L2 in adults. Where is the termination of the spinal cord at birth? Around L3. Where is the termination of the spinal cord in an adult? L1, L2. Which type of neuron is found in the anterior horn of the spinal cord? Motor neurons. Somatic efferent. Which type of neuron is found in the posterior horn of the spinal cord? Sensory neurons. Afferent. Function of different gates in the action potential. Voltage-gated sodium channels open during depolarization, semicolon. Potassium channels open for repolarization. Where's the location of Gray-Combinature in the CNS? The center of the spinal cord connecting the left and right gray matter. Number of cranial nerves, 12 pairs. Spinal nerves have 31 pairs. What is the cervical plexus? Network of nerves from C1 to C4 that innervates the neck and diaphragm. What is the brachial plexus? It's a nerve network from C5 to T1 that supplies the upper limbs. What is the lumbosacral plexus? Nerve network from L1 S4 that supplies the lower limbs. What is a dermatome? An area of skin supplied by a single spinal nerve. Which cranial nerves have parasympathetic fibers? CN3, 7, 9, and 10. Which cranial nerves carries 75% of parasympathetic fibers? Vagus nerve, CN10. When this part of the brain gets damaged, all sense will disappear. Olfactory. Where's the location of the sympathetic ganglia? Alongside the spinal cord. Parentheses, sympathetic trunk / chain ganglia. Where is the location of the sympathetic center? Lateral horns of the thoracolumbar spinal cord. T1L2